She doesn't need to be asked for her opinion. She always agrees anyway. The speaker was my mother. She turned to Aunt Carol as if I weren't there. I was sitting right at the head of the table, warm yellow light falling over me, both hands resting on my lap. I didn't look up. I don't know why that moment made my heart tighten. Maybe because, for the first time, something the whole family had always understood without saying was finally spoken out loud. And once it was said, it sounded frighteningly bare. If one day I stopped speaking altogether, would anyone even notice? And that is the story of Elena Brooks. There are people who go through their entire lives without causing trouble, without inconveniencing anyone, without ever saying no. But in return, they slowly lose themselves, piece by piece, inside the calm that others grow used to enjoying. Not everyone who stays silent is at peace. Some people stay silent because they're afraid of losing their place. If you've been used to giving in for too long, do you still remember what it feels like to be asked for your opinion? If you're listening to this story late at night, when the whole house has gone quiet, I want to ask you where you are, what city you're in, and whether this hour feels long to you. If this story touches any part of you, or if you think someone else needs to hear it, stay with me until the end. And if you can, please hit like and subscribe so we can walk through this story together. This video was created with the help of AI and edited by a human, not to encourage imitation, but to offer a reflective, gentle, and very human perspective. My name is Elena Brooks. In my family, I've always been the easygoing one. The child who doesn't argue, who doesn't make a scene, who doesn't make dinner feel heavy. From a very young age, I learned that nodding made things pass more quickly. Sure, whatever. I'm fine either way. At first, those were just small agreements to avoid arguments. I believed I was keeping the peace, doing the right thing, but gradually something started to slip out of rhythm. I didn't notice it right away. It was just a vague emptiness whenever a decision was made on my behalf. Just a nameless fatigue after saying yes too easily, too often. I didn't know then that this very silence would lead to a decision that cost me the most important thing in my life. I grew up with the image of the good child, the kind everyone in the family could describe with a few familiar sentences. I wasn't the most outstanding, and I wasn't the troublemaker either. I learned to observe before speaking, to read people's expressions to decide whether I should stay quiet or nod along. Every time I didn't object, dinner went more smoothly. Every time I agreed, the air felt a little lighter. Over time, my family grew used to me always being there to soften everything. That familiarity grew with me. Fewer and fewer questions were directed at me, replaced instead by announcements. We've decided this is how we'll do it. Everyone's already agreed. And I nodded, like a reflex, not because I didn't have an opinion, but because I didn't want to make things more complicated. That night, my phone buzzed just before 12 a.m. A pale blue glow spread across the bedroom ceiling, cutting through my restless sleep. It was my mother. She spoke quickly, her tone more like she was rearranging a schedule than calling someone whose opinion mattered. An important decision had already been made about me, for me. I know you'll agree, she said, as if stating an obvious conclusion. I smiled faintly and replied okay out of habit. But when the call ended, I lay still in the dark, a cold feeling spreading through my stomach, as if I had swallowed something that didn't belong there. I stared at the ceiling, where the shadow of the slowly turning fan formed blurred, repeating circles. For a very brief moment, I wondered, if I said something different, what would happen? But the question drifted away as quickly as I let most things drift away. I used to think I was strong because I endured. I believed patience was a kind of strength, that silence help me stay steady through friction. But is endurance a choice, or just a habit that's been praised for too long? I didn't have an answer then. I only knew that I kept staying silent. The next morning, I made coffee, checked my work schedule, and went on with my day as if the night before had left no trace, except for a vague feeling that followed me all day, that something inside me was slowly being decided for me, piece by piece, while I kept smiling as if everything were fine. At first, the losses were very small, so small that if I hadn't looked closely, I wouldn't have called them losses at all. One afternoon, I canceled plans with a friend because something came up at home. A class I meant to sign up for, I let go because the family schedule had changed. Each time, I reassured myself there would be another chance, that family always came first. I got used to setting my own wants aside, like placing a half-read book down, thinking I'd come back to it later. Once, a work opportunity opened up right in front of me. It wasn't anything huge, but it was something I had been waiting for a long time. Right then, my family needed me to stay a bit longer. Just a few weeks. I didn't say much. I sent an email turning it down and shut my laptop. The room was so quiet, I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner, as if reminding me that every decision has a sound, no matter how small. That evening at dinner, the conversation revolved around new changes. Everyone discussed things enthusiastically, as if everything were moving in the right direction. Then someone said warmly, "Good thing he stepped up to handle this. So thoughtful." Heads nodded. A few compliments followed. I sat there, chewing slowly, feeling the taste of the food fade in my mouth. It was my work, from start to finish. But my name never appeared in the story. My credit wasn't taken from me. It just passed right by me, as if I had never been there. I suddenly realized I was disappearing inside the story of my own life, not because anyone was intentionally erasing me, but because I had grown used to stepping back. No one was cruel. Everyone was simply acting out of habit, a habit built from all the times I had agreed without conditions. That night, I washed the dishes alone. The kitchen light reflected off the sink, scattering shimmering rings of water. I looked at my blurred reflection in the stainless steel and wondered when I had become so transparent. I still didn't dare to change. I kept choosing silence as a way to keep everything intact. But somewhere deep inside, a dull ache began to form, that the cost of this peace might be higher than I had imagined. I started to notice my body reacting before I even understood what was happening. Morning headaches, dull and lingering. Nights spent tossing and turning, watching streetlights filter through the curtains, counting the thinning traffic sounds. During the day, I grew more irritable, even over small things. Sometimes I startled myself with my own voice. Sharp and clipped, unlike how I used to sound. I told myself it was exhaustion, work, the weather. I didn't think about silence. Then one evening, the whole family gathered. The food was plentiful, the familiar smell of roasted meat filling the room, voices humming in conversation. A decision was announced like the final item in a news broadcast. No one asked what I thought. No one waited for a response. My throat went dry, as if I had swallowed a piece of bread too big to go down. I was about to speak, just one sentence. But habit pulled me back. I set my glass down, took a breath, and stayed silent as usual. "Everyone quiet for a moment," my mother said, turning to a newly arrived relative. "Elena's easy. Asking her is basically the same as not asking." The words were released lightly, without malice, without emphasis. A few polite laughs rippled through the room, the kind you hear when someone tells a familiar story. I laughed too. My smile appeared right on cue, but my heart skipped a beat then seemed to drop somewhere very deep. In that moment, I felt as if I had stepped slightly outside my own body, watching the scene from a distance. Some sentences don't upset anyone right away, but they stay, and over time, they quietly change how a person sees themselves. I sat there, listening as the conversation flowed on as if nothing had happened. My hands rested on my thighs, tightening then loosening. For the first time, I realized that my silence was no longer a sacrifice. It was a way of erasing myself from the shared picture, making things easier for everyone else to arrange. A wave of shame rose up, sudden and burning, not because I had said something wrong, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had never said anything at all. I was there in flesh and bone, yet I had let someone else define me with an offhand remark. And what scared me most wasn't the sentence itself, but the fact that I had helped make it true. After that evening, I still agreed one more time, not because I believed everything was fine, but because I was afraid of trouble, afraid of surprised looks, of heavy air, of being asked why I was suddenly different. I said okay in an even tone, as if I were choosing it. But the moment the words left my mouth, I felt something close inside me. A few days later, we had a meeting with people outside the family, a conversation that seemed harmless and polite, with hot coffee and casual questions. I sat nearby, listening, my hand resting on the warm cup. When a question directly related to a decision about me was raised, I prepared to speak. I had already formed a short answer, clear and polite. But before I could say it, a relative's voice cut in, firm and confident. "Elena's fine with this option. She's always flexible." No one turned to look at me. The conversation kept flowing, smooth as if everything had already been agreed on ahead of time. I nodded by reflex, lips forming a polite smile. But inside, something cracked very softly, not a sound, but a feeling. I realized the price of agreeing wasn't exhaustion or busyness anymore. It was that I had lost the right to make my own choices, right in front of other people, and no one even thought they needed to ask. I sat there, listening as my name was used like a convenient adjective. Easy, flexible, no trouble. I didn't react. I didn't correct anyone. I let everything happen the way it always had. But my body betrayed me. My shoulders tightened. My breathing grew shallow. I felt myself shrink into the chair, like I was watching a different version of me being spoken for. On the way home, I drove more slowly than usual. The traffic lights changed, familiar stretches of road slipping by. I thought about all the years I had called this love, putting other people first, keeping everything peaceful. But what I felt now wasn't warm anymore. It was hollow. And in the quiet between two turns, I understood. This wasn't love anymore. This was my absence from my own life. I knew with absolute clarity that I couldn't go back to the way I used to be, not because I wanted to fight anyone, but because if I kept going, I wouldn't recognize the person nodding along anymore. That familiar request came on a perfectly ordinary afternoon. No tension, no argument, just a steady voice, as if everything had already been arranged and all I needed to do was confirm it for the sake of formality. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the late-day sunlight stretching into long stripes across the wooden floor, listening to every word. Before, I would have nodded right away without thinking. This time, I didn't. I let that empty space exist. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. This silence was nothing like the ones before. It wasn't the familiar silence meant to avoid conflict. It was a deliberate pause. I could feel my heartbeat clearly, slow but heavy, like it was setting a rhythm for something new. My relatives looked at me, waiting. Their expression changed quickly. from confidence to surprise, with a brief flicker of confusion. I saw that moment clearly, like a thin cut in the air. No one was used to me not reacting right away. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest expand and then fall. "Give me a little time to think," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me, but it didn't shake. The room went quiet. No one laughed, no one jumped in. Someone gave a slow nod, as if trying to understand what had just happened. I sat a little straighter, both hands resting still on the table. I didn't explain more. I didn't justify myself. I simply asked for time. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to apologize for it. After the conversation, I stepped outside and stood on the porch. Cool air moved past me, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass. I realized my breathing felt lighter. Not because everything was okay, but because I hadn't betrayed myself in that moment. The quiet around me felt thick and real, completely different from the empty silences I had lived inside for so long. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the surprised look from earlier. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusing. It was just a small shift. But it was enough to make me understand. I had stepped out of my familiar role. And that was when everything began to change in ways I never expected. After that, the atmosphere in my family changed in a way that was hard to name. No one said anything outright, but I could feel the shift in every sentence. My phone buzzed more often. Messages came regularly, gentle and concerned. "Are you okay? I'm just worried about you." Calls lasted longer than usual, with no scolding, just strange pauses, as if everyone was carefully testing where I stood. I realized the thing that hurt most. No one was angry. Everyone was disappointed. Disappointed in a quiet, restrained, polite way. And that politeness made me feel guilty. I was used to making everything run smoothly, used to being the easiest person in the room. Now, just because I asked for time, the familiar rhythm was off. Then that question came during a short call one evening. The voice on the other end slowed down, as if weighing each word. "Why have you been different lately? You've never been like this before." I was silent for a few seconds, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I suddenly understood something with painful clarity. The old version of me was easier for everyone. The version that always nodded, always showed up, never made anyone wait. When someone steps out of a familiar role, they don't just face resistance, they also face other people's regret. Regret for the convenience that's gone, regret for an old order that used to run too smoothly. I didn't argue. I didn't explain at length either. I said simply that I needed time to think for myself, and I stopped there. When the call ended, I sat still on the couch, watching the room grow darker. Guilt rushed in, heavy and real. It told me I was doing something wrong, that I was making people sad. But underneath that layer of guilt, there was another feeling, lighter, quieter, slipping in very slowly. I stayed with both feelings. I didn't take back the boundary I had just set. For the first time, I allowed myself to sit with discomfort without rushing to soothe it away. And in that place where pain and lightness overlapped, I understood that freedom doesn't arrive like a door thrown wide open. It comes quietly, with a price I was learning how to accept. A few days later, I made my choice. Not in some formal family meeting, and not in the middle of an argument, just a normal morning. The sunlight coming through the kitchen window, the steady hum of the coffee maker behind me. I spoke slowly and clearly, as if reading back a thought I had considered carefully. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't justify myself. I only said what I could do and what I couldn't. The room fell quiet. There wasn't the dramatic reaction I had feared. Just a brief, slightly strange silence, like a familiar song being cut off mid-verse. I stood there, both feet on the floor, feeling the weight of my body. I didn't take my words back. I didn't add anything to soften other people's feelings. I was done speaking. Then something I didn't expect happened. Someone in the family, not the loudest person, not the one with the most authority, hesitated and asked, "So, what do you think, Elena? What do you want?" The question was gentle, almost awkward, like they were trying out a new way of speaking. But it hit me harder than any objection could have. I was so surprised it took me a few seconds to respond. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Something warmed quickly, spreading from my chest through my whole body. I answered, my voice calmer than I expected. Not long-winded, not roundabout. Just my opinion, this time spoken all the way through. I didn't win over anyone. No one lost, no one apologized, and no one was criticized. But a boundary had just been set down, clear and quiet. I realized a boundary doesn't have to be built with tension or tears. Sometimes it only needs to be called by its proper name. After that, life went on. It didn't suddenly change course, but I felt more in my right place than ever before, neither stepping into anyone else's space nor letting anyone cross into mine without realizing it. On the drive home, I went slowly, the window cracked open. The wind rushed in, carrying the smell of the afternoon air. I smiled to myself, not because I had won, but because for the first time in a long time, I knew I was present, truly present, in my own life. Over time, the atmosphere in my family softened very slowly. Not a clear reconciliation, and certainly not a return to the way things used to be. Just gatherings with less tension, conversations no longer full of awkward pauses. I noticed some people kept more distance from me than before. They called less, checked in less. I didn't try to pull them back. I accepted it as an inevitable part of change. Not every relationship stays with you to the end of the road. But other things began to appear too. The way people spoke to me shifted so subtly that if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it. Fewer statements made on my behalf, more questions, even if tentative. I didn't rush to feel hopeful. I simply watched, like someone standing at the edge of a small but real movement. Once, while getting ready for a gathering, a relative, someone who didn't usually make the decisions, came close to me. Their voice dropped, as if afraid of disturbing me. "If you don't feel okay, just say so. Next time, we'll ask you first." The sentence was short, not flowery, not promising anything big. But it made me go still for a few seconds, like I had just heard a sound that felt familiar, one I hadn't heard in a long time. I didn't burst into tears. I only felt my throat tighten, as if something were lodged there. I nodded and smiled. I didn't need to say more. That moment was enough. I suddenly looked back at the version of myself from years ago, the one who believed that, to have boundaries, I would have to trade away closeness, that if I spoke up, everything would collapse. Turns out not everyone is lost. Some people step back, some step closer, and some learn how to stay in a different way. I learned to accept those small changes without demanding miracles, without expecting perfection. I understood that real shifts often happen in very small, very ordinary sentences. I didn't go back to the old me, not because I had become tougher, but because I no longer wanted to disappear so everything could stay peaceful. I stayed in the shape I am now, not loud, not confrontational, just clear enough to be seen. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I'm not silent anymore, but I'm not fighting either. The biggest change isn't in how I speak, it's in how I stay with myself. I came to understand that silence is also a choice. And for many years, I chose it because I was afraid everything would crack. I don't blame anyone. Everyone grew used to the role I took on. What I'm doing now is simply taking responsibility for my boundaries, not pushing that onto someone else, not blaming circumstance. My family isn't perfect. Neither am I. There are days I still hesitate, days it's still hard to say clearly what I need. But I'm living more honestly now, with what I can do, what I can't, and what I need to be respected. I don't need everyone to agree with me in order to feel like I'm in the right place. I just need to stop disappearing from my own life. The story you just heard is a fictional story, inspired by everyday situations and deeply human experiences. It was created with the help of AI and edited by a human, meant to offer a reflective perspective and gentle educational value. And it does not encourage you to imitate any specific actions in the video. The value of this story isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about daring to look back at your own familiar habits, the ones that sometimes get praised but quietly take your voice away. There's a small gift for you after this story. Maybe it's a reminder to listen to your own silence, whether it's protecting you or slowly making you disappear. If you've made it this far, maybe you're in a quiet room, in a city somewhere lighting up for the night, or in a long night where you just want someone to understand you. Where are you, and does this hour feel peaceful to you? If you've been silent for too long, leave a line in the comments. Just, "Me too," is enough. If this story touched you, please hit like to support, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories. Thank you for staying to the end, for listening with patience and compassion. Your presence here matters, and I hope that when the video ends, you'll carry that feeling of being understood with you a little longer tonight.